Ma had been selling fruits in the market for years. Life was hard, but she had no choice. Her mother was sick, and hospital bills were too much. Every morning, she woke up early, carried her tray of fruits, and stood under the sun, calling out to customers. One day, as she arranged her fruits, a black sleek car parked nearby. A tall, handsome man in an expensive suit stepped out. He looked around like he wasn't supposed to be there. Then his eyes landed on her. "How much for the fruits?" he asked. Ma looked up, surprised. Rich men like him never stopped to buy street fruits. 700 naira per fruit, she said simply. He smiled and took out his wallet, but before he could pay, a rude man shoved past him and hissed, "Move aside, rich boy. We don't have all day." Ma ignored the insult, but the rich man didn't. He turned to the rude customer. His voice cold, "Watch your mouth. Selling fruits is not a crime." The rude man looked at him, then at his expensive watch, and quickly walked away. Ma raised an eyebrow. You didn't have to do that." "Maybe I just like standing up for hard-working people," the man said. "My name is Gray." Ma handed him the bread. "Nice to meet you, Gray. Now, do you want more fruit, or do you just want to stand here and talk?" Gray chuckled. "Maybe both." From a distance, someone was watching them. Nate clenched his fists, his eyes burning with anger. Years ago, he had wanted Ma for himself. He had promised her money, a good life, but she had rejected him. "You think you're too good for me?" Nate had sneered when she turned him down. "I don't love you, Nate. Please stop following me," Ma had said. He had never forgotten those words. Now, seeing her smile at another man made his blood boil. "So you rejected me, but now you're smiling at this rich fool," he muttered. His hands tightened into fists. "If I can't get you, no one will." The next day, Gray returned to the market. Ma frowned. "You again?" Gray leaned on her stall, smiling. "I didn't get your name yesterday." "My name is Ma." Gray smiled. "A perfect name." Ma rolled her eyes. "If you're here to joke, I have fruits to sell." Gray chuckled. "Actually, I have an offer for you. I want you to own your own supermarket. I'll pay for everything, but you'll be the boss." Ma's eyes widened. "Why would you do that for me?" Gray shrugged. "I believe in you. You work hard. You deserve more." Ma hesitated. She had always dreamed of having her own supermarket. But why would a billionaire help her? "No, thank you," she said. Gray raised an eyebrow. "Why? I don't take gifts from strangers." Gray smirked. "Then get to know me." Ma laughed despite herself. "Fine, but I still don't trust you." "Then I'll earn your trust." From a corner, Nate watched them, his face dark with anger. "She will regret this," he muttered. Days passed, and Gray kept his word. He helped Ma open her supermarket. Ma's variety store customers flooded in. Ma worked hard, and soon her business became famous. Gray visited every day. They talked, laughed, and slowly Ma started to like him. One evening, Ma sat outside her big store looking sad. Gray noticed. "What's wrong?" Ma sighed. "My mother is very sick. The hospital said she needs surgery, but I don't have the money." Gray held her hand. "How much do you need?" Ma looked down. "A lot more than I can ever afford." Gray didn't think twice. "I'll pay for it." Ma's eyes widened. "No, I can't let you do that." Gray smiled. "I want to. Let me help." Tears filled Ma's eyes. "Gray, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he whispered. Ma nodded, too emotional to speak. The next day, Gray transferred the money, and the surgery was successful. When Ma's mother woke up, she held her daughter's hand and said, "That man loves you. Don't push him away." Ma smiled. "I know, Mother." That night, after closing the supermarket, Ma and Gray walked under the streetlights. Gray stopped walking and turned to her. "Ma, do you know why I did all this?" Ma looked at him. "Because you're a kind man." Gray smiled. "Because I love you." Ma's heart pounded. "You love me?" Gray nodded. "Yes, I love your strength, your kindness, the way you fight for your dreams." Ma felt tears in her eyes. She had been afraid of love, afraid of getting hurt, but Gray was different. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I love you too." Gray's eyes shone. "Say it again." Ma smiled. "I love you, Gray." Gray pulled her close, and under the night sky, they shared their first kiss. But not everyone was happy. Nate sat in his office, his face twisted with rage. "So she loves him now." "After rejecting me," he growled. He picked up his phone. Find a way to ruin her supermarket. I want her to suffer. On the other end, Peggy, Ma's assistant, smiled wickedly. Consider it done. Ma had never been this happy before. Her mother was healthy again, her supermarket was growing, and Gray was always by her side. Every morning, he would stop by the supermarket before going to work. He would sit by the counter, watching her bake, teasing her, making her laugh. She liked the way he made her feel safe, the way he believed in her even when she doubted herself. One evening, after closing the supermarket, Gray took her hand and looked into her eyes. Ma, you don't know how much I love you, he said softly. Ma felt her heart race. I love you too, Gray, she whispered. He smiled and kissed her gently. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She had never believed she would fall in love, but with Gray, everything felt right. But while Ma was happy, Nate was burning with anger. He sat in his office, staring at the pictures of Ma and Gray on his phone. He had hired someone to follow them, to watch their every move. Seeing them together made his blood boil. She rejected me, but now she's giving her heart to him, he muttered. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with evil thoughts. He picked up his phone and called Peggy. It's time, he said. Peggy, Ma's assistant, smiled. Don't worry, boss. I'll make sure her supermarket is destroyed, she said. The next morning, Ma arrived at the store early as usual. She greeted her workers, put on her apron, and started arranging her fruits. Customers lined up outside, waiting for the doors to open. But just as she was about to unlock the door, health inspectors stormed in. This supermarket is being shut down, one of them announced. Ma froze. What? Why? She asked, her heart pounding. The inspector handed her a paper. We received reports that you're selling rotten fruits and expired products. Your supermarket is not safe for customers. Ma's hands trembled as she looked at the paper. That's a lie. We only sell fresh fruits, she protested. Outside, people gathered, whispering. I knew it. She was never a real businesswoman, someone said. Gray made her rich, and now she's exposed. Another person added. Ma felt dizzy. How could this be happening? She turned to Peggy. Did you know about this? Peggy faked a shocked expression. No, Ma. I swear I don't know anything. But inside, she was smiling. Gray arrived just in time to see the supermarket doors being sealed. What the hell is going on? He demanded. Ma looked at him, tears in her eyes. They shut me down, Gray. They think I poison people, she said, her voice breaking. Gray's jaw clenched. This is a setup, he said firmly. Ma shook her head. It doesn't matter. It's over, she whispered. Gray cupped her face. Don't say that. We'll fight this, he promised. But Ma pulled away. Gray, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world, she said. Gray's heart twisted. Don't say that, he pleaded. But Ma had already turned away, walking into the rain, leaving him standing there helpless. From a distance, Nate watched from his car, smirking. And just like that, she falls, he said. But what he didn't know was that Gray was not a man to give up easily. That night, Gray sat in his office, going through security footage from the supermarket. He knew someone had set Ma up, and he was going to find out who. Suddenly, he saw something that made his blood boil. Peggy. She had been sneaking into Ma's office at night. He rewound the footage and saw her slipping papers into Ma's files. His hands tightened into fists. So, it was you, he muttered. The next morning, he stormed into Peggy's apartment. She opened the door, shocked to see him. Gray, what are you? Before she could finish, he grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages. He found a text between her and Nate. It's done, Peggy had texted. She's ruined. Gray's eyes darkened. How much did he pay you to betray Ma? He asked coldly. Peggy trembled. Gray, please, I can explain. Save it, he snapped. You're going to confess everything. An hour later, Gray dragged Peggy to Ma's house. She opened the door, her face pale and tired. She hadn't slept all night. Gray, what are you doing here? She asked weakly. We need to talk, he said. Then he turned to Peggy. Tell her the truth. Peggy looked down, ashamed. Ma, I betrayed you, she whispered. I was working for Nate. He told me to plant fake evidence in your supermarket. He wanted to destroy you. Ma's heart sank. Nate, she repeated, her voice shaking. Nate nodded. He never forgave you for rejecting him. He wanted revenge. Ma covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. Gray stepped forward. Ma, you're not a failure. You didn't deserve this, and I swear I will make Nate pay. Ma looked at him, her eyes filled with emotions. Gray, I don't know what to say, she whispered. He took her hands. Say you believe in us. Say you won't give up, he said softly. Ma took a deep breath. I believe in us, she whispered. Gray smiled and pulled her into his arms. But their happiness was short-lived. That night, Gray's phone rang. He picked up. Hello, if you want to see Ma's mother alive, bring $2 million, a voice said coldly. Gray's heart stopped. Who is this? You have 24 hours, the voice said before the call ended. Gray turned to Ma, his face pale. Your mother, she's been kidnapped. Ma gasped. No, who would do this? She cried. Gray clenched his fists. Nate, he growled. He grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. Ma, please don't do anything crazy, she said, running after him. He turned to her, his eyes burning with anger. I will not let him hurt you again, he said. Then he drove off into the night, leaving Ma standing there, tears streaming down her face. In an abandoned warehouse, Gray smirked as he watched Ma's mother tied to a chair. Gray thinks he can take everything from me. Let's see how far he's willing to go, he said. His men laughed. Do you really think he will come alone? One of them asked. Nate smirked. He will, because he loves her. At that moment, Gray sped through the streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He had never been this angry in his life. He was going to end this once and for all, and if Nate wanted war, Gray was ready to give it to him. Gray gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing, his heart burned with anger. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Nate wasn't a fool. If he had the guts to kidnap Ma's mother, then he had people working for him. Dangerous people. What if they were many? What if they had guns? He couldn't risk running in blindly and getting himself killed. He had to think smart. He took a deep breath and pulled over. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. The police chief answered. This is Gray. I need your help, Gray said, his voice firm. What's going on? The chief asked. A man named Tony has kidnapped someone. He's demanding $2 million, but I know if I go there alone, I might not come back alive. The police chief was silent for a moment. Then he said, We'll handle it. Tell him we are bringing the money, but we will be ready to take him down. Gray exhaled slowly. Thank you. He called Nate next. I have the money, Gray said, keeping his voice steady. Nate laughed on the other end. Good boy. I knew you'd make the right choice. Bring it to the warehouse. Come alone. Fine, Gray said. An hour later, Gray arrived at the warehouse. He parked his car outside and stepped out, holding a black briefcase. He had to act calm. He knew the police were hiding nearby, watching everything. The warehouse doors creaked open, and Nate walked out with a smug smile. Behind him were 5 of his men, all holding guns, and in the middle of them sat Ma's mother, tied to a chair, looking weak and scared. Where's the money? Nate asked, stepping forward. Gray held up the briefcase. Right here. Nate grinned. Good. Drop it on the ground and step back.